And there's just this growing gap between the workplace leaders that are aligned with leadership, that understand the ROI of investment, they're experimenting and have been now for 3 or 4 years, and the people who are like, I'm frozen in place by indecision among my management team, other than lease comes up, we renew for less space. You can't just say trust. That's the other problem. If I say trust to a leader, they're like, oh, please, come on. But if you can pair it up with accountability, with dependability, then it works, right? Office space and workplaces are a tool. Technology is also a tool. They are tools that can drive greater return on investment if you know what purpose the tool serves, if you've defined what purpose the tool serves.
Hello, workplace innovators of the world. Welcome back to Workplace Visionaries, the podcast that gets real about the present and future of how people work. I'm Jane Young from Hubstar, and this episode is a conversation with Brian Elliott. For many of you workplace folks, Brian needs no introduction. He's a leading voice and advisor on the future of work. Well known today as publisher at Flex Index, Brian's all about busting myths and sharing data on flexible work policies, culture, leadership, and all things workplace. Brian has an entrepreneurial background, and he's also held senior roles at companies like Google, Boston Consulting Group, and Slack, where he spun up the Future Forum, a think tank backed by Slack, focusing on research and developing playbooks for real-world challenges, including hybrid work. He co-authored the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, How the Future Works, and is CEO of Work Forward. In this episode, we get into the great RTO debate and the truth behind the headlines, what trust really means in the context of work, the risks of slipping back into command and control leadership styles, the AI hype and impact on jobs, and in true Brian style, he'll reference data and studies to back up his point of view. So I hope you take as much away from this conversation as I did and feel re-inspired to focus on what really matters if you're involved in leading high-performance teams and shaping your workplace strategy. Thanks for listening.
Brian Elliott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jane. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
We're really excited to be speaking with you today, genuinely, because at the risk of making you blush, I actually think you're quite a special person, not just in this workplace and culture space, but in a broader sense. I've kind of noticed that you just go a few levels deeper than most, which I don't know if that's something to do with your academic smarts and, fact that you're an analytical numbers guy / data nerd, and you're a people guy who understands what great leadership looks and feels like. And maybe because of that balance, I don't know, you seem to have a quite a nuanced perspective that sometimes takes the form of a very rational middle ground, as in you don't get swept into one polarized extreme or another. For example, when it comes to big topics like the impact of AI. But at the same time, you're not afraid to have a strong opinion, say, when it comes to things like autocratic leadership. So I always keep an eye on your workplace stuff, but I've been going through some other stuff, and I can see as well that you're not stuck in your views, that you seem very open-minded, like you have that wisdom to know how little you know and keep updating your point of view based on new information. So for all of those reasons and many more, I think your perspective is just one that I trust and respect, and I know our audience will feel the same. So thanks for being here. First thing in the morning in San Francisco.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's I've learned that over time, to have a much more open mind. I am a data geek, thank you, and nerd when it comes to that. The thing that I learned over the course of my career, 25 years managing and leading teams in tech, was the people side mattered a lot more, and that human behavior and engagement and empowering my team and bringing people along was the thing that actually drove better business results and made other people happy and made me happy. And so I love to try to combine the two. And the one thing that I have figured out is that I don't have all the answers. And it sounds obvious when you say it that way, but I think a lot of us, especially me when I was younger, got trained that we were expected to have all the answers, right? And I think that's part of the problem that we face kind of more globally. We have a lot of leaders who have been very successful who think they have all the answers to everything, including stuff that's outside their field. I'm not shy about my own opinions about things, but I know that I've also got a lot to learn, and I'd rather listen first before jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed you challenging some of the big headlines because, if you listen to all the headlines, they lead you to believe that, everyone's going back to the office. But the data shows this isn't, it's not really the case, isn't it? Work from home rates have been flat as a pancake, as Nick Blue would always say, for ages. And a lot of the RTO in the US, I guess, I think I've heard you say a lot of it's driven by government, and the real picture is kind of more, you can tell me if this is a right summation of it all, but small companies are really where the growth and flexibility are at, and the bigger companies are more likely to be shrinking and they're favoring structured hybrids, with the most common policy being 3 days a week in the office. But I also understand compliance isn't great, and there's a lot going on beneath the broad brush policy, as in team level agreements, exceptions. So bearing all that in mind, if you're advising someone in a big company that's going for a structured hybrid model, could you talk about what's the right way and the wrong way to go about that?
Yeah, and I'll actually use an example that's in the news these days, which is Microsoft. I actually think they've done it the right way, and I'll tell you why. I think that most large organizations, have swung. Let's put it this way: I know a lot of organizations that in 2021 said, "Hey, you know what? We don't have all the answers, but we're pretty sure that 3 days a week in the office makes sense. That's going to be our policy. We'll allow you to have exceptions, as we always have," meaning there are people who are fully remote, where that's where we hired them and how we hired them, and it works for us and it works for them. We have times when we need, to go deal with, a childcare situation, we got a doctor's appointment, whatever else, you'll have that flexibility. But 3 days a week is sort of a norm, and they said it and they've kind of forgotten about it. And it's worked for them ever since, because that's more flexibility than most people had prior to the pandemic, but it still gives them an opportunity to bring people together. 2 to 3 days also happens to be what most people want. And there's a really big condition that sits underneath that, which is, I'm pretty sure that I want that and I want that regularly if I live in the same zone as my team. Meaning if I'm on a team that's all co-located in the first place, meaning everybody's in the same city, then coming in 2 or 3 days a week is not really a hardship, as long as we actually think actively about what we want to do with those days. And it's not heads down on Zoom calls all day long. So spend time as a team, have more social connection, interaction. It's kind of what people have said they wanted since 2020, 2021, all the way through. The challenge is if you take the extremes. So one extreme is actually complete and utter free-for-all. The complete free-for-all actually doesn't work because it creates a collaboration tax, a coordination tax for people who do want to get together. And if Jane, you and I are on the same team and we both want to come in 2 days a week, but nobody's bothering to give us simple rules of thumb that say, hey, you and I could probably figure it out on our own if it's just the two of us. But if there's 12 of us, let's at least pick a couple days, a couple anchor days to do it, Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you do that, it generally works. But if you make it an utter free-for-all, you're putting a lot on managers to figure it out each for themselves. The other one that doesn't work is 5 days a week. 5 days a week, there's zero research out there that like Nick has found, I've found, Raj Chowdhury at London School of Economics has found, anybody in this, that 5 days a week is actually better on any given dimension. Productivity, nope. Clearly not. Innovation, nope. Connection, engagement drops. We see what happens. We know that if you shove people 4 and 5 days a week, certain people quit. The two groups that quit are women more than men, because women more than men are more often the primary caregiver at home, but also people with marketable skills. And even in the lousy job market we've got in the US today, data scientists have choice. I know of plenty of organizations where if it's a 5 day a week rule, it ain't for the data scientists because they're not coming in. Here's what Microsoft did. And it's got the sort of hubbub going these days, which is, oh my God, Microsoft is saying 3 days a week, be in the office. Let's all take a deep breath. Microsoft said 50% in 2021. 50% last time I checked is 2.5 days. So they've gone to 3 days. They've said if you live within 50 miles of an office. They've said it's going to start in February in near the headquarters in Seattle, or we'll let out in different places. And they said another thing that's really important, which is there's going to be latitude across teams depending on how your team is composed and what you do, because they know and understand that people who are in co-location, who are in hosting facilities, for example, or 5 days a week as it is, And they have other teams that are wickedly highly distributed where 3 days might not be the right answer. So they're allowing some latitude there still. I've also talked to Dawn Klinghoffer, and she's actually shared the data publicly recently. They have evidence behind it, and they do, that says that people actually thrive better, that they feel more empowered and more engaged and more energized in their business if they're in 3 days a week. So, and that she is sharing, and they are sharing that data internally as well. So I think Microsoft's getting it far more right than a lot of organizations. Here's the key. Not everybody's Microsoft. Not everybody's in a Fortune 100 company. If you are in a small company, you can thrive and do really well by attracting and retaining and bringing in people who want to be in the office 5 or in San Francisco 6 days a week. You can also thrive and do exceptionally well with teams that are fully remote. Just bring them together once a quarter. But in most of those cases, you're talking about an organization that is growing and thriving and doing well on its own, and it's actually a little bit easier. So I gave you a really long answer to a fairly brief question, but that's sort of Brian's current take on how this whole thing is playing out and what's working and what's not.
Well, it's a nice bit of realism because obviously you get these headlines, and I know that some analysts will just, this big company will do the big headline clickbait thing, will all come out, and then suddenly a load of CEOs are ringing up analysts. Oh my gosh, this to do this, should we do this? And like buffeted by the winds of change, as opposed to like having a North Star sense in amongst this, and it's not even the be all and end all, but it's not place either, and we just lose the plot a little bit with it. Yeah,
and the CEOs, like there's a couple things going on simultaneously. One is shark bite media. Nick came up with that term, or used that term in a webinar that we did for Flex Index a week or so back. Shark bite media is the headline that says everybody's going back because company X is going back, right? So AT&T's CEO with his culture memo got a lot of attention around it, and AT&T is going back 5 days a week. Andy Jassy did the same thing with AWS. If you look at the data, 29% of the Fortune 100 are back 5 days a week. There's a sizable portion of them that are 4 days a week, which honestly isn't much flexibility. But those are the groups that are doing it the most. There's another factor in this, though, which is a lot of those organizations, the ones that are pushing 4 and 5 days a week, are also shrinking their workforces. And, it's not just the thing in the background these days. When the federal government DOGE stuff got pushed in the U.S. earlier this year, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy said it out loud. We want people to quit because of this. We want people to leave and not pay them severance costs. Because we're changing the terms of their employment. It's also pretty evident that's happening in big companies. Both the correlation as well as the Federal Reserve Board put out what's called the Beige Book in late August, which is sort of the big Fed Reserve report. And in it, there's this line that says, in most districts, we're getting reports from companies that firms are using stringent RTO demands to get people to quit on a voluntary basis.
It's in black and white.
To drive down employment. I just continually bring that back to, it's one of the dumbest ways I know of to reduce your workforce because it is untargeted.
You lose the best.
Yeah, you lose people not on the basis of performance. You lose basis on who can't commute or won't commute or can find a job someplace else, which is dumb in the first place. And then you also lose engagement of everybody else, right? All you're doing is ticking people off. So it seems one of the worst ways to cut costs.
Yeah. You think there'd be a ripple effect in terms of engagement and performance beyond the surface there. Yeah.
One would hope.
And what about policy compliance then? Because obviously you can get data on policy compliance now, say by team. But what should you do with that? Because that could be used for good or bad. Because people are getting pretty fearful, I think, about being monitored in general. Even well outside of the workplace. I mean, I know in the UK there's headlines recently about arrested for tweets and HM Revenue and Customs accessing personal bank accounts. And there's just this general fever pitch rising about monitoring in general. So, as these concerns around this whole Big Brother thing rise, that's one part of the story. And then the other related part is that, surely these insights are actually useful if you use them properly, and the way that you respond to those is likely to say quite a lot about your culture and could have systemic effects that could be the opposite of what you intended if you're not careful. So what do we do about policy compliance data? It seems like we should have it and we should use it maybe to drive conversations, but we could also mess that up.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple thoughts. One, tracking office utilization is actually important. You know this, like from a commercial real estate and office perspective, the people who are facilities managers, your workplace professionals, others need to know and understand whether spaces are being used and used effectively. That's actually critically important. It's also important from like an understanding cultural norms and behavior and what's working and what's not in an organization. Don Klinghoffer at Microsoft, again, talked about the fact that they used what they call pseudonymized data on attendance, which is, I'm not attributing it back to Brian, but I am attributing it to Brian, these types of jobs, these types of people, salespeople, engineers, et cetera. When they come in more often, what changes, what doesn't change, what gets better, what gets worse. That's actually really helpful people analytics insight over time. Where it gets a little bit screwy, like giving that data to managers to have the conversation with their team, meaning if I know that I've got a team of 20 people, I actually have some degree of benefit if I've said, hey, I expect us all to be in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If I know some people never, ever come in, I probably want to have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
I probably know that already. If I'm a good manager, I can probably have that conversation. If they've got good reasons for it or we know why it's happening, then it's okay. But it can be helpful to have that conversation and have that data. I think where we jump the shark on this is two things. One, when it goes from that, meaning manager and employee conversations and relationships, to if our rule is 3 days and you're below 1.5, you need to go talk to HR. Oh, please. Turning HR into the cops of attendance is just, abusing HR in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't really impact employees either. It's one of the things that I've talked with enough HR people about over the years that they hate doing. It burns them out. They know it has virtually no impact. The broader issue, though, is the further you take this, the more you are telling people to turn off their brains, to perform to the metric because you don't trust them. And that's the biggest challenge I think that we've got, which is the act of monitoring creates more burnout. It creates resistance. It creates a loss of engagement. And what I do not get is how you can rationally sit there and say, we're going to push people back 4 and 5 days a week into the office. We're going to monitor them. We're going to punish those who don't show up. But by the way, at the same time, we want these people to help us think about how we're going to redesign how we work to leverage generative AI. Good luck, dude. It's just not going to work because there's a set of assumptions under AI and work that we can replace jobs. We can replace tasks. And even task automation is a pretty modest gain in most of what I've seen outside of customer support. What does work is getting teams to redesign their workflows to actually change how they work. Executives aren't close enough to make that happen. You can't force that from the top down. And so you need teams to be engaged in thinking about like what of our work can be automated? What can we actually change and do? That means you need engaged employees who feel trusted as opposed to at the first opportunity, you're going to push me off of the edge of a cliff. So I just think the whole act of, monitoring and the more stringent compliance that's aimed at getting people to leave the building, again, drops engagement, drops people's willingness to contribute. People won't go the extra mile for their customer, and they're certainly not going to go the extra mile when it comes to automation.
Yeah, and it's kind of short-sighted to think, we'll just automate all the tasks the humans do, and then we don't need the humans. It's like, when has technology ever made our life as easy as that, in the sense that the more technology enables us to do, just the more stuff we can do. So we do harder, more complex stuff. And that's surely why we need leaders with EQ, is because, you're managing a whole lot of people that are doing increasingly complex stuff. And that is quite a cognitive load. And therefore you need to be able to interact with people in a way that they can actually do that and think straight and handle all of that, I guess.
Yeah. And that's where we kind of get into maybe some of the broader issues too of we've gone, I live in San Francisco. I've been in the tech industry myself for near 30 years now. And I've seen the pendulum swing a couple of times. I've seen the cycles. Would be my third, maybe fourth upturn/downturn, depending on what happens next. And the tech's pendulum in particular swung really hard when it comes to leadership style, right? So I think tech swung maybe a little too far towards employees get what they want, right? I went from a startup where I was CEO where I've always believed really strongly in engagement of my employees is critical and important. I want them engaged and involved. But at Google, honestly, the excesses were excessive, right? I just felt like I get why you do 3 meals a day, but some of the other things felt like coddling, right? It felt like performance didn't really matter that much. It was talent hoarding. We want to keep people no matter what. And that's just sort of, not a good environment to be in. Yeah. You end up with people on teams that are like, so-and-so is not pulling their weight and so-and-so shouldn't be working with us. And so-and-so is really hard to get rid of because the systems sort of worked against you. So it wasn't just that they were nice and overdoing the sort of employee benefits. It's that we didn't really manage on the basis of outcomes and results either quite often. Now you got on the opposite extreme, which is like get tough and tough talking leaders in the sort of top down command and control style that Elon Musk, represents in a lot of ways. And you do get people who want to follow that. You get a narrow slice of people that are like, yeah. And now we're living in what's called the 996 in San Francisco, which is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week is now an operating norm in a lot of these firms. That works for a number of people. That works for the go-getters. It doesn't scale past a certain point.
I mean, I would have loved that in my 20s, but I just couldn't do that now in my life.
Exactly. It narrows you in terms of your life stage. It also eventually doesn't work. Like the human body can't do it for a period of time. One of my favorite quotes around this actually comes from a fellow ex-Google leader, and this guy named Chris DeBona. Chris led the Android engineering team while I was actually at Google. And he was talking about this when Sergey Brin came out months ago and said, everybody should be working 60-hour work weeks at Google. You should probably be in the office at least 5 days a week, pulling your 60 hours. Chris said, that's not how you optimize team performance. The thing that he did to optimize his team's performance, block their calendars for 4 hours a day in the afternoon. No one could book anyone on his team for a meeting between, I think it was like 12 noon and 4 p.m. And 4 hours of heads down time, if you're a developer, is fantastic. And his thing is, if you're a developer, more than 4 hours, you start to lose the thread. More than 6 to 8 hours, you definitely don't know anymore exactly where you are and what you're doing. You need a break. You need to walk away. You need to do something else. Other people hated Chris for this. Like he got negative feedback from his peers because why can't I book meetings with Chris's team? It's really annoying. But he did it because he knew it made his team more productive. If you want more productivity, it's about focus. It's not about putting your nose to the grindstone. So it works. The short burn, intense burn does work and works depending on your life stage for a little bit longer, depending on where you are. But it is not a healthy long-term way to build and grow a business.
And when I think back to when I used to be really happy to be in the office at 1 a.m. and shower in the office, live in the office, just like, yeah, it's all great fun. At that point in life, there's no way I was spending my time as wisely as I do now. So the more hours does not even equate to, even if you could stay focused, which she obviously is just, you say it's not the case, but even if you could, you're not choosing what's the best things to do and not do at that point. And that's when you've got a bit more under your belt and you can use your time on the right thing.
Yeah. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing some leaders that are sitting there saying, I want to be like that. I want my team to be like that. Right. And partly it's because those CEOs themselves are like that. They still are. Look, I outgrew that. I got to the point where I didn't want it any longer, where I'd overdone it myself. But some haven't, right? If you are a highly successful public company CEO, you live to work. You really almost exclusively do, because it's the thing that gets you going psychologically as well as financially motivated and everything else. And you want everybody else around you to be that way too. But if you're running a 50,000 person organization, you can't find 50,000 people that are going to be able to do that in all walks of life that will take the pay you will give them and the opportunity you will give them to do it. Even at Google, I'm sorry, Sergey, the rewards that you got for putting your 60 hours a week in early stage are not the rewards that anybody at Google is seeing these days from an equity perspective.
So it's a scary thought in a way that command and control might be making a comeback, because Frederick Laloux, The Reinventing Organizations, that book, I remember reading that, and it's arguing that organizations, they kind of evolve in line with the prevailing stages of human consciousness. So that kind of dominant leadership style in any era would reflect the worldview of society at any time. So in some ways, I guess the fear is that we'll regress to authoritarian styles of leadership if this is mirroring a wider shift towards authoritarianism. And if we perceive that everything is screwed up and dangerous in the world, regardless of how accurate that is, we're more likely to clamor for order and certainty, and therefore accept that this is being done to us. So what's your perspective on authoritarianism and what we can do about it from a leadership perspective? Or is it just doing what you think is right and sticking to your guns? Or
I do think that solve locally is my first answer to all of this, which is, look, I've been in that situation myself where I've been the leader inside of a team where the more senior leader in the organization might be making people a little crazy. And your job as a leader is to keep a steady hand and help people do it. One of the analogies I've used before is as a manager, your job is to be a dampener of anxiety, not a tuning fork of anxiety. Right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I have been the shit shield for my team in the past. And as a leader, your job sometimes is to be the shit shield, to prevent the stuff that's up above from coming down and impacting your team. And you're not just doing it because you're nice. You're doing it because you know it matters in terms of the output and performance of your team, right? Like, we're all aligned around the goals and the outcomes and what we're trying to accomplish. This isn't about everybody just feeling good. It's actually about business performance. And so I think managers get stuck. This is why you see, even with the RTO thing, often the mandate gets passed down from on high. The CEO doesn't even have alignment with his own executive suite on this when it's at 5 days a week, sometimes not even at 4, sometimes not even at 3, but it's being dictated down. And the manager's job just got harder because they're being told this is the thing you now need to do, when they know that's not going to have anything that's going to impact their next quarter's deliverables, right? There's no positive that comes out of this that I'm going to get. And they're going to be held to those deliverables because, the bar keeps getting higher and higher. We're now in year 2 of burnout cycles going up. I've now seen this in plenty of data sources and in my conversations with customers. The most burned out people are middle management. It's that middle management layer. You're just giving them another rock to weigh them down. That's also why you don't see the compliance with the policies, because the manager sits there and goes, I know that Brian is coming in, 2 days a week and not 4, but Brian delivers, and there's no way in Hades that I'm firing Brian for not showing up 4. And when it comes to threatening people with non-promotions, get a grip. In most big organizations, they stopped promoting people, or the pace of promotions went way down over the past couple of years anyway. So I just think, that command and control from on high, the RTO thing is one example of that. It's the same thing when it comes to generative AI. We're seeing it in the same way. We're seeing, one of my favorite memes on this is this thing that's like, what do we want? Crowd of CEOs. AI, when do we want it? Right now. Why do we want it? We don't know. Right? It's just, the hype is through the roof. You could read, Kelly Monahan at Upwork has some really fantastic stuff on this. You can read anybody else's survey, and somewhere between 90 and 95% of all, CEOs say that, it's a urgent issue that they must address. And so you get the, go on AI, and it tends to be coupled with the word efficiency, right? And employees understandably translate efficiency in one ear, and what they hear coming out the other is layoffs. But as a leader, you can actually do things that can help your team along the way, which is, hey, let's take a look at our goals. If we turn this from an efficiency thing to how would we achieve our goals faster? How would we achieve higher goals as a team? We all not only get better job preservation, but there might be some upside in it, right? if I then start down that path of what are the outcomes we're trying to drive, if I then start investing time with my team on let's use some of these tools together, let's experiment with it, let's talk about what's acceptable use, what are good norms, I then translate what is a top-down mandate into something that's actually useful for my team. And I think that is the job of leaders, to take what feels like a command and figure out what are the good elements of it that I can utilize, and how am I going to help my team navigate through this. And I think especially in a world in which the job market is not great and pressure on people is through the roof, finding that those notes of positive realism, which is, I'm being a realist. I know the challenges we're facing, but I'm going to help us find opportunities in it, can help your team build something that I think is critical in 2025, which is resilience to weather it. It's not just about breaks. It's about let's talk through these things together and let's be part of a team.
Yeah, and I guess trust and resilience and courage are kind of interrelated, aren't they? Because it takes courage to trust someone in any context, because you're putting yourself out there, and there's a chance that they might not do what you often expect, and that might hurt in some way. But you take the risk, you have the courage to trust people. And when you have the courage to trust people, you get in the arena and then you do the thing and you build that resilience, which in turn creates trust. I guess it's a kind of a loop, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that. And it absolutely is, because if I have trust in my leader, if leaders have trust in their teams, you actually get better outcomes. There's studies that show this. Institute for Corporate Productivity put this out a year plus ago now, but they look at organizations and they stratify them by their performance, comparison against their peers on revenue growth, profitability, customer satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera. And the biggest driver between the top and the bottom that they found was trust. And it was two-factor trust. It was, do I feel trusted by my leaders? Do leaders trust their employees? And you can't just say trust. That's the other problem. If I say trust to a leader, they're like, oh, please, come on. But if you can pair it up with accountability, with dependability, then it works, right? People need to be able to depend on me as a leader, that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. I need to be able to depend on my teammates that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. We need to manage people who are not holding up to their commitments, right? Because that blows trust for everybody else. And we need to think about, how do we measure teams and share, rewards on the basis of the results that we generate. That also builds trust. So it's not just trust people. It's, are we reinforcing the behaviors that we want to see around dependability, around accountability, around focus on results, that actually allows trust systems to thrive and not just be hollow words.
Yeah. It's tricky, and there's the complexity of organizations as well. I guess leaders can overestimate how much they understand the complex system that they're dealing with, and that they're just like, there's a problem, bang, that seems like a solution, 50,000 other things go wrong, and they're just don't, that sense of overestimating how much control you have over the system is kind of an issue. The alternative to that, I guess, is trusting people and giving people the autonomy based on the belief that generally, if you are a good leader, have confidence, you're just like, you have to kind of have confidence in your parenting and then let it go and hope they don't do terrible things. Have confidence in your team that you can set a clear end game and paint a picture of what good looks like and kind of say, this is where we're headed, and then have the courage to let it go and let people do the thing.
Yeah. That's really hard though, right? And I think that's part of why you see what you see, which is, there's Anne-Laure Foray and John Weeks are two professors who wrote an HBR study on the broken psychological contract at work. And they talk about this, which is a lot of leaders, especially in larger companies, are thinking about the ethics of justice, which is fairness. Fairness being thoughts like, a 5-day-a-week return to office mandate, because that's fair. And especially in a firm that might also have frontline workers, it's fair with everybody else. And that just seems like a simple rule that we can apply that will check the box and address all known issues. And what it does is it takes away actually a lot of the latitude that managers had pre-pandemic to allow more flexibility in appropriate situations that are context dependent. That's the ethics of care. I care about my team. I'm actually going to make sure that I find things that work for my team, but that also address your needs, right? Like, how do I balance out the two? I think what's causing this in part is that senior leaders, especially in larger companies, don't trust their own management teams, right? And they may have good cause to do so. Their own management teams are often under trained, under capability. There was a Gallup study, something like 44% of all managers globally have had any training whatsoever.
Cheap.
Yeah. Shockingly bad. You learned by watching your manager manage, and whatever good or bad stuff they did is what you picked up, right? So that's not great. So I think that the fear of that is causing some of this top-down command and control. It's not helped by companies that are delayering, taking management layers out, taking people from a span of 6 people to a span of 12 people that they're managing, because that just causes more stress and burnout. I don't think, though, there's zero proof that in a world where every CEO will say the world of work is evolving faster and faster, there's zero proof that command and control is actually going to fix the problems that you've got that are underlying this. They may give you a short-term pop or a Band-Aid because you take some costs out and Wall Street likes you, but long-term performance erodes, like so many studies have shown.
Yeah, it's a short-sighted game in a way, isn't it? And, I guess leaders also need to create the capacity for change as well, don't they? Because, that's the thing. Oh, what, AI, let's do the AI thing. We don't know what we're doing. And then, but actually they're not giving their teams any capacity and any resources to be able to just mess around and play with things. And it's interesting, that whole idea of what kind of leadership it's going to take, and making sure we don't slip backwards, giving people the capacity to play. And then we've been always moving to specialization, haven't we? It's always been towards specialization. And if it's going to be towards empowered generalists, that's a whole different dynamic in that game too.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too, because that whole move towards greater and greater and greater specialization now runs up against AI that takes some of those specialized skills and makes them more generally available. I think we'll move to a world where generalist skills, but more importantly, EQ skills are increasingly important, like relationship skills. I still think there's plenty of evidence in the academic literature that shows this too, that having truly deep skills in an area is still hugely beneficial. That people can get the surface level. I can use Lovable as a product manager to vibe code up a basic prototype, but I'm not going to be able to use it to write the code that actually integrates it into a complex system on the back end. So.
No, and the experience is just like, wow, followed by, gosh, it's like you're up till 2 a.m. and you've gone through that big, woo, isn't this the coolest thing? And it's so fast and it's so easy and look how cool it is. And then after like 3 a.m, you're like, actually, I was sick of this. Nothing works. Start break. And then you realize that, we've got a way to go. But then, like you have been playing around, and then you might have like UI components that you can use for things, and that's cool. But yeah, it's a bit, we're not there yet in terms of it replacing people who are really good at what they do in any field. Yeah. Even in tech, I think more of the job crunch in big tech in particular has actually been caused by AI in terms of the AI investments, which are huge. Means that a lot of the companies that are making those investments have to cut back on operating expenses every place else, which is mostly humans, right? So I've worked with a number of friends who've worked at and in the Googles and Microsofts and Amazons for years, who are just feeling the increased pressure of do more with less for now the third year. And it's partly driven by profitability concerns and needs to deliver quarterly earnings. It's partly driven by the investments in AI. It's less driven by the actual, AI will give a developer a 10% boost on average, higher for some, lower for others, but it's not a replacement. It automates and helps with some tasks, but not jobs. And I think that's where we fall into the fallacy of task bundles, that someone's job is just a whole bundle of tasks. It's more than that. Yeah. It's your relationships, it's your understanding, it's your shared context. And so, we've got a ways to go. And there will definitely get a lot of efficiency gains to be had in the world of workplace, I guess, because we've got all this complexity, we've got the volatility, we've got the variable attendance patterns, we've got this big mess of stuff, we've got this higher bar and everything, higher bar that we're not going to put up with this underutilization, or we've got to have a great experience, competitive and attracts and retain talent. We want all this stuff. We've got these spaces and these people, and just making that work. That's something that is still quite manual and can be upgraded. So hopefully we just work on the right things and optimize. We have to be careful what we optimize for as well. Remember when social media was super fun and exciting, and like we were all filled with this democratizing hope that it would just transform the world in all these beautiful ways, and it started so like that. And I just remember that was such a beautiful thing, and I was right in amongst that at that time, and it was just all this hope and joy about what was going to be. And then we added a like and a share button, and then we could optimize for the button clicks, and then fast forward, and social media is just like dark and divisive and sketchy as hell for democracy. And so it turned out to be like the opposite of what we hoped for. So I guess we got to watch. It reminds me as well, I saw a really interesting thing about over optimizing LLMs and how they started to it's fine when they lie and you can see the lie in the chain of thought, but when they start to hide the chain of thought and lie with not having any ability to detect it, that is a result of over optimization. So they were having to build Slack into that. And I just thought, what's an awesome analogy, isn't it, for like human beings who are, less distinct from LLMs than when you actually think about how you describe how they work. It's not so different to humans. But the fact that you even over optimize the machines and they start to do weird stuff in the same way that humans do is kind of interesting. So it's kind of, I don't know, we're probably in danger of optimizing the workplace in many of the wrong ways and optimizing a lot of things.
I think like from a workplace perspective, the thing that I see, I think the most often is there are workplace leaders who are aligned with their leadership and they're marching in a common direction and they know where they're going and it's working well. And that can happen at any of a range. Like Tracy Hawkins at OpenAI has pretty strong alignment with, Sam Altman and crew. They have a, Monday through Wednesday, everybody's in the office. Most people are there also Thursdays. A number are there on Fridays. They know what they're doing as they expand out. They do really nice offices. You have people like, Atlassian, which Annie Dean recently departed from, but they've invested heavily in rethinking what the office purpose is and what they do. They are a highly flexible organization, but offices still play a critical role. I've profiled, PagerDuty, other companies that all had that sort of like wherever they sit on the spectrum, they're aligned. I think the bigger challenge is when leadership is not aligned and not willing to make the investment. So you get leadership that is telling you two things simultaneously. You're being told, we may come back 5 days a week, so therefore don't lose any space. But you're also being told shrink your spending and shrink your footprint. You're also being told don't redesign it because we're not going to give you the capital for it, even though the spaces you've got are a decade plus out of date and your employees are really ticked because they're coming back and they don't have enough places to take calls. So it's just, those are the folks that I think are the most stuck. And there's just this growing gap between the workplace leaders that are aligned with leadership, that understand the ROI of investment, they're experimenting and have been now for 3 or 4 years, and the people who are like, I'm frozen in place by indecision among my management team, other than, lease comes up, we renew for less space.
Yeah. It's tricky, isn't it? There is a lack of alignment between people, policy, and place. And you could see some big dramatic screw ups like, we've screwed down our, reduced our floor footprint by such and such an amount. And then we change our policy. There's no space midweek. So there's that level of alignment. But there's even a meta problem there with the amount of stakeholders all talking a different language, isn't there? It's like that. If you ever get to even a common definition of the problem, that would be a really beautiful thing, let alone get to a common definition of what the solution might look like. And only then can you think about solving.
Yeah, and like office space and workplaces are a tool. Technology is also a tool. They are tools that can drive greater return on investment if you know what purpose the tool serves, if you've defined what purpose the tool serves. If you know and understand, for our organization, I've talked with my users enough to know what their needs are. I'm now putting forward a proposal that actually fits and meets their needs. We have ways of actually measuring whether or not it's having an impact through their engagement, their utilization, our cost per event type of activity. You're going to be in a much better place than simply, this is a budget item that we need to reduce over time. That's true of space. That's true of technology, both. And so it's really hard otherwise. And these are enablers of humans to do better work. And we need to think about it that way.
Yeah. And I guess even if you do make a decision when you've got all these stakeholders that struggle to get aligned, it'll be that decision is often shrunk to the lowest common denominator that everyone can agree on. And then you don't get the transformation, you don't get the change. And then it's tricky for someone to stick their neck out, isn't it, in that group and be the champion of change. And I think with space and place and people as well, it's like all the space heads are suddenly expected to care about people stuff and understand that language. And then all the people heads are supposed to talk space language. But then when they're talking about BWG files, log labs, utilization rates, they're just, So this new data sets and visualizations and new ways of thinking about what is the purpose of the workplace. And it's a coming together of planets that didn't previously need to align, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's about like we're about a third, at least in the States, of companies where the workplace team reports up to the CHRO now instead of the CFO or COO. That realignment alignment across place, tech, and people is actually really critical, and it's hard. And it can be challenging, but the alternative is far worse, right? The misaligned is what we've lived with too often, and the lack of talking to each other. It requires, for HR and people leaders to understand operations that take years to see to fruition, that, longer timeframes quite often. And it requires, place leaders to engage those people differently. I got this from a conversation I had with Janet Pogue that I wrote about the other week again. They did a study at Gensler of, a very simple act, which is how do you engage end users in the design of a space? And not surprisingly, people are much happier with the space if they've been engaged in the design of it, right? And not surprisingly, the more you're engaging more junior level people, the bigger a benefit you get, because let's face it, the execs often get a look. But the other thing that was maybe a little more surprising is the utilization is actually much higher. People understand the purpose of the space better if they've been involved in the process and brought along, as opposed to, now we have this space, we're going to teach you how to use it. Like, oh God, you got this massive like communication and change management thing in front of you, as opposed to, of course I know how to use it because you've been bringing us along on this journey for the past year.
And I guess as burnout, you said burnout was obviously is a big thing and it's rising all the time. And then we've got this social isolation. We're not feeling like we belong. There's less friendships at work, and or even a transactional kind of vibe around it. And that could get worse with remote work. I suppose those are some downsides. But do you see that the office office design can pick up some of slack and experiences fill those gaps? So which is kind of different from an activity-based working kind of approach or other approach. It's a different way to think about it in a way.
I would say that there's a couple major factors here. One, just having people come to the office isn't a solution. There was a study a year or so ago that showed that people who are lonely at work, some of the most lonely people are the ones that are coming in the most. It often has to do with whether or not their leaders and managers are creating time and space for connection. Meaning, if you're coming in, but it's all nose to the grindstone and you're just doing calls from a cubicle, you're probably actually more ticked off and you've got less time for connection. What does work besides that time and space is design, and it has a major implication. Ryan Anderson from Miller Knoll talks about relationship-based work. Instead of activity-based workplaces, relationship-based workplaces. The primary role of space these days is not for your individual heads down work. You need to have places for that. The primary role is for us to actually collaborate, communicate, get to know one another, build relationships. If you design on that basis, you achieve your goals a lot better and you reduce that. So you got to bring both things together. The space and the design does have an impact, but the leadership and the fact that your leader is saying, I'm going to create space within our week for us to simply get to know each other better is the much, much bigger win.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Brian Elliott, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for being here today. I just really appreciate you taking the time.
I'm glad to do it. Thank you very much for having me. Great chatting with you as always.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
Thanks, Jane. Bye-bye.
Bye.